Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning, I understand, we will take a look at Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 14. Excuse me. And texts 39 through 43. So we have 43 on the board. So I'll chant, I'll just chant 39 through 42 and read the translations and purports, and then we'll work on 43 together. So text 39. Samvatsarantehi bhavan ekaratram mayeshvara rangsyatya patyani chate bhavishyantya parani bho. Oh, my dear king, you will be able to enjoy with me as my husband at the end of every year for one night only. In this way, you will have other children, one after another. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Although Urvashi had adversely explained the nature of woman, Maharaj Pururava was very much attached to her, and therefore she wanted to give the king some concession by agreeing to be his wife for one night at the end of each year. Text 40. Antarvatnim upalakshya devim saprayayau purim punastatra gatobdhante urvashing vidamataram. Understanding that Urvashi was pregnant, Pururava returned to his palace. At the end of the year, there at Kurukshetra, he again obtained the association of Urvashi, who was then the mother of a heroic son. 41. Upalabhya muda yukta samuvasataya nisham atainam Urvashi praha kripanam virahaturam. Having regained Urvashi at the end of the year, King Pururava was most jubilant, and he enjoyed her company and sex for one night. But then he was very sorry at the thought of separation from her, so Urvashi spoke to him as follows. 42. Gandharvan Upadave mam stubhyam dasyanti mamati tasya sangstu vatastushta agnistalim dadurnapa urvashim manyamanastvam so buddhyatta charunbane. Urvashi said, my dear king, seek shelter of the Gandharvas, for they will be able to deliver me to you again. In accordance with those words, the king satisfied the Gandharvas by prayers, and the Gandharvas, being pleased with them, gave him an Agnisthali girl who looked exactly like Urvashi. Thinking that the girl was Urvashi, the king began walking with her in the forest, but later he could understand that she was not Urvashi, but Agnisthali. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur remarks that Pururava was very lusty. You think? There was a song. There was a musical in the 50s, I guess, called South Pacific, and one of the songs in that musical play was One Enchanted Evening. And this was a song in my range, and it just seemed like this really amazing love song. One enchanted evening, you may see a stranger across a crowded room, and somehow you know even then that somehow you'll see her again and again. So this is Pururava. He saw Urvashi and he just thought, bing! He was immediately captivated. And because he was not so shabby himself, she agreed. And she had all these conditions, right? Okay. I mean, and how did he approach her? hey, let's have sex. What is this, 1967 or something? So, and then we see all the complications that came with it. She said, okay, but there are some conditions. And he just blew it. You know, the Gandharvas came and stole the lambs that he was supposed to protect, and then he ran out after them naked, and one of the conditions was, I don't ever want to see you naked unless we're actually getting together. And so she took off, and he was devastated. So, very lusty indeed. Immediately after getting the Agnisthali girl, he wanted to have sex with her. But during sexual intercourse, he could understand that the girl was Agnisthali, not Urvashi. This indicates that every man attached to a particular woman knows the particular characteristics of that woman during sex life. Thus, Pururava understood during sexual intercourse that the Agnisthali girl was not Urvashi. Okay, text 43. Do we do word by word first here?
No. Yes. Well, yeah. Yes. First we'll chant it together, then after that we'll do it.
Well,
One by one, yeah.
one by one before we chant the whole pada?
Yeah.
Okay. Stalim Nyasya Vane Gatva Staling Nyasya Vane Gatva Grihan Adhyayato Nishi Grihan Adhyayato Nishi Tretayam Sampravrittayam Tretayam Sampravittayam Manasi Trayi Avartata Manasi Trayi Avartata Stalim Yasya Vane Gatva Grihanadhyayato Nishi Tretayam Sampravittayam Manasi Traya Vartata. Others, please. Word to word. Stalim, the woman Agnisthali. Nyasya, immediately giving up. Vane, in the forest. Gatva, on returning. Grahan, at home. Adhyayata, began to meditate. Nishi, the whole night. Tretayam, when the Treta millennium. Sampravittayam, was just on the point of beginning, Manasi, in his mind. Trayi, the principles of the three Vedas. Avartata, became revealed. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. King Pururava then left Agnisthali in the forest and returned home, where he meditated all night upon Urvashi. Of course. In the course of his meditation, the Treta millennium began, and therefore the principles of the three Vedas, including the process of performing yajña to fulfill fruitive activities, appeared within his heart. Responsively, please. King Pururava then left Agnisthali in the forest and returned home, where he meditated all night upon Urvashi. In the course of his meditation, the Treta millennium began, and therefore the principles of the three Vedas, including the process of performing yajña to fulfill fruitive activities, appeared within his heart. Srila Prabhupada's purport. It is said, Tretayam yajato makai. In Treta Yuga, if one performs yajñas, he would get the results of those yajñas. By performing Vishnu yajña specifically, one could even achieve the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Of course, yajña is intended to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anyone remember this from the Bhagavad Gita purport? The Sanskrit? Yajña vai Vishnu. Yeah. Yajña is for Vishnu. While Pururava was meditating upon Urvashi, the Treta Yuga began, and therefore the Vedic yajñas were revealed in his heart. But Pururava was a materialistic man, especially interested in enjoying the senses. Yajñas for the enjoyment of senses are called karma-kāṇḍīya-yajñas. Therefore, he decided to perform karma-kāṇḍīya-yajñas to fulfill his lusty desires. In other words, karma-kāṇḍīya-yajñas are meant for sensuous persons, whereas yajña should actually be performed to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. To please the Supreme Personality of Godhead in Kali-yuga, the saṅkīrtana-yajña is recommended. Yajñai saṅkīrtana-yajña yajñanti sumedasa. Only those who are very intelligent take to saṅkīrtana-yajña to fulfill all their desires, material and spiritual, whereas those who are lusty for sense enjoyment perform karma-kāṇḍīya-yajñas. Om ajñāna-timirandhasya jnānanjana-shalakaya chakshurunmilitam jena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukhaṁ karoti vāchalam pangum langhayate girim yat kripatamahang bande Shri Gurun dinataranam. Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. So I have to admit this is a section of the 9th canto I haven't really spent a lot of time with. So this morning was an adventure. And one thing that came to mind as I was reading was my my first psychology professor when I was in college. I first attended, it was a small liberal arts college in Lexington, Kentucky, in central Kentucky, called Transylvania University. It's a little, yeah, I know. We had a lot of fun with that when I was a senior in high school. Oh, Bill got accepted to he's going to meet Dracula there. Anyway, there's a whole thing. But my psychology professor was a gentleman, a German gentleman named Dr. Hans Hahn. Dr. Hahn was maybe 5'4", and he reminded me of nobody more than a Don Martin cartoon. Little guy with the, with a nose and a little pot belly. And this was 1965, and he had just discovered these sunglasses that you'd clip onto, these sunglasses that you clip onto your glasses frames, and you could flip them up and flip them down. And he was fascinated with those. He would brag. We were actually his last class. He had retired at the end of the 1964-1965 academic year, but he taught one class. This was in a summer session. And so we were his last class, and he had a lot of fun with us. He would play with his flip-up sunglasses. He'd say, these are very cool. Flip them up, regular glasses. Flip them down, sunglasses. He did this throughout the whole course of the term. But sometimes he would remind us that he had studied with Dr. Sigmund Freud. And so he would say, therefore, I am a Freudian psychologist. And I want to know, is there anybody in the class who's not yet 18 years old? I hadn't turned 18 yet, so the first time he did that, I was one of the hands that went up. And he says, we're going to talk about sex, so you got to close your ears. So I got to ask, is there anybody in here who's a brahmachari? We're going to talk about sex, so you got to close your ears. Actually, you got to open your ears. Because what we see with Pururava is just how entangling this whole business can be. I mean, this guy was, he was apparently made for this, right? You can imagine, he looks like one of those guys in, in the Hindi, the Bollywood movies, especially like the Vedic ones, and they're not like super cut, but they're a little bulky because Indian aesthetic is a little fat. Got to have a little fat on your bones. Otherwise, you just look skinny, even if you're really muscular. I think in the modern ones, it's different. I remember seeing a more recent Mahabharata maybe 10, 15 years ago, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I mean, everybody's very pretty, but it doesn't look like the B.R. Chopra one. A little skin here and there. But so he seemed to be made especially for this. And whatever conditions Urvashi put, he was down with it. He says, okay, sign me up. I'll do that. If as long as I get the girl, at the end of the story. Or actually, not at the end of the story. His idea was to get the girl throughout the story. And then we see in one of the purports, after he blew it, and she said, okay, one night at the end of the year, that's it. And there'll be a son, there'll be a child from each of these meetings, but that's it. And while he was still with her, he was anticipating, he was fearing losing her company. I mean, we have three problems in the world in one sense, right? We've got fear, regret. We got regret about the past, fear about the future, and confusion about the present. And so here he's still with her, and he's already thinking, oh my God, she's not going to be here, in a little bit, and he's freaking out. And this is the nature of this whole business, is we get so attached. It's kind of like, I don't know if this is politically correct anymore or not, but it's kind of like the Uncle Remus tales, where Brer Rabbit got stuck on the tar baby. Or like when you get, in the old movies, someone gets caught in a pit of quicksand, right? And the harder you try to get out, the more stuck you get. You get sucked down, and so there's more downward pressure, and it becomes harder and harder to get out. And I remember hearing a podcast some years ago. Someone was interviewing this sociologist, and her specialty was the sociology of sex. And this is not a prudish woman by any means. She'd been through a couple of marriages that didn't work out, and she was in a committed relationship, but never going to sign the paper again because it's just too hard to undo. Even now, I guess, there's still some trouble. And so she was not at all prudish. She's actually very forward-thinking. But she had a piece of advice for people. And I found it very striking, especially coming from someone who, wasn't exactly, some model of Victorian chastity herself. And she said, if you don't want to become attached to someone, don't have sex. Because attachment grows. And sometimes, you hear these stories about these nice girls who end up with the bad boy and they're stuck with him. And the guy's abusive. And then he comes back and apologizes and said, "Oh, I love you so much. I'll never strike you again." And then it happens again 3 or 4 days later. And the cops come and they say, "Do you want us to take him away?" And she says, "Oh, no, I love him so much, and he promised he'll never do it again." It's this attachment. Sometimes if we spend a lot of time close to someone, our heart's electromagnetic fields can become entrained with each other. So there's so many ways that we become attached through this kind of business. So Pururava, he's sitting in his room meditating on Urvashi. In the meantime, Treta Yuga comes. That affords him another opportunity to try to get what he wants. Okay, so I'll engage in these yajñas, because now in the Satya Yuga, there's not even castes really, right? Everybody's called the Hangsa. And the process for self-realization is meditating on the Absolute Truth, meditating on the Supreme Lord. So he's meditating, now even in Satya Yuga, he's meditating on Urvashi. Now she's not an ordinary woman. She was kind of cast out of Svarga, condemned to have a human experience for a while. And she seems to be there to kind of teach this character a lesson. This is not going to satisfy you. It just is simply going to inflame and strengthen, inflame your senses and strengthen your attachment to material enjoyment. It's not really such a great thing. Yet he persists. So he says, "Okay, now I get to. Now I've got another avenue for attaining my desired goal." So this is the nature of the material world. Even though we know better, we often just go back for more. I remember I did learn my lesson when I was 18 skating. This was spring of 1965, and a bunch of us took up skateboards. Now back then, skateboards weren't at all what they are today. They were pretty rudimentary. They were like a board that was maybe 1.5 inches, couple inches thick, no flex in it, and the trucks were just indoor roller skate wheels, kind of some composite material like wood something or other, for skating in roller rinks rather than outdoor skates had metal wheels back then. We didn't have these, fancy plastic wheels that are like 3 or 4 inches wide. So I was skating down one of our, in the winter was one of our sledding hills. And back then skating meant you go down a hill and you make some turns. When a few years later I saw what kids were doing on skateboards, I was astonished. So I was going down this really long, steep sledding hill, and probably got up to about 25 miles an hour. And I went to make a turn, and one of the wheels hit a little pebble, and the skateboard spun out from underneath my feet, and I went down hard. And I got street burn from the tip of my toe to my hip and all up my arm, and it broke every little bone in my wrist because I threw my arm out to protect my head. We didn't have any protective gear back then. We had no helmets. We had nothing for our wrists, nothing for our elbows or knees. And after that, as much as I liked skating, whenever I got on a skateboard, I freaked out. Not so much with surfing or body surfing. I don't think I ever learned my lesson. I had to wait for my body to just tell me, look, man, you can't do this anymore. So we keep going back for more. And, we'll even engage in these, we'll do whatever it takes to get what we want to attain. So we may engage in these karma-kāṇḍīya-yajñas. Here's the problem with pursuing karma-kāṇḍa. First of all, you have to do it perfectly to actually get the results. We see in the 6th canto what happens when you make even the smallest slip, just the emphasis on the wrong syllable, and you got the opposite result. The process kind of literally blew up. It blows up in our faces. And then the results that you get don't last very long, right? They're temporary. Krishna says that even in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, but then he contrasts it with bhakti. But engaging in bhakti, I'm losing the verse. So, that in this endeavor, there isn't any loss. There isn't any diminution. Whatever we get engaging in bhakti, it's permanent. And as we see beginning in the 1st canto, you don't even have to do it perfectly. When Narada, this is one of the posts that I pound in his Tattva Sandarbha, I think, Srila Jiva Goswami writes about a certain kind of logic called saṅkīrtana-yajña, the logic of pounding the post. Anybody ever put up a fence? Dug fence, So first of all, you got to dig the hole with your post hole digger, and then you set the post in, whether it's a wooden post or like a metal stake post, and you pound it in with a post hole pounder. You have to set it really, and then you fill in the hole, you tamp that down, you pound it in some more, you tamp some more. And so the same thing with pounding a nail, right, into a wall or into a board or something like that. The more you pound, the more firmly set the nail becomes. So he refers to these constant repetitions of certain points in the Shastra as being examples of saṅkīrtana-yajña, this logic of pounding the post. So this is one of the posts that I pound, is that in that 5th chapter of the 1st canto, when Srila Narada Muni is instructing Srila Vyasadeva that he needs to write the Srimad Bhagavatam. He'd already compiled all the Vedas and the Puranas, the Itihasas, and still he was feeling unfulfilled. And he was depressed. He was disconsolate. He was just like bummed. What did I do wrong? And he's contemplating, did I miss sufficiently glorifying the Supreme Personality of Godhead and devotional service to him? Narada Muni, his guru, shows up and says, yep, that's exactly what you're missing. And he made it really clear that even all the work that he had done, composing all the Puranas, including the Bhagavata Purana, sometimes I've seen it referred to as the original Bhagavata Purana, and the four Vedas. One of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers, B.R. Sridhar Maharaj, described the Vedas as a jungle of sounds, because there's something there for anybody. And I think it's something like 3/4 of the Vedas address karma-kāṇḍīya. And then there's jnana-kāṇḍīya. Same thing with jnana-kāṇḍīya. If you want the result, you got to do it perfectly. Right? But bhakti is completely different. So anyway, he's compiled all these Vedas and the Itihasas specifically to address Kali-yuga people by putting it in the instructions in story form. And still, Narada Muni's kind of getting him squared away here. And he says, you have not sufficiently glorified the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he has to go back and, dare I say it, revise the Bhagavad Purana into the Srimad Bhagavatam that we have now. The Srimad Bhagavatam that Shukadeva Goswami heard from him, that Shukadeva Goswami recited to King Parikshit, that Sutta Goswami recited, this is what we have, recited to the sages of Naimisharanya. So, and along the way, he points out that, he says, compared to what you need to do, all literature can be compared to what? Anybody remember? A place of pilgrimage for crows. Where do crows hang out? The dump. He says it's rubbish. What's he talking about? Dime store novels, harlequin romances, pulp fiction? No. He's talking about the Vedas, the Puranas, the Itihasas, compared with what you need to do. And what's the word, what's the adjective he uses to characterize all that Vyasadeva has done? Jugupsitam. Detestable, disgusting. Pretty strong language. And then he points out the difference between bhakti and everything else in that 5th chapter. He said that if devotees of the Lord, even if they perform bhakti imperfectly, still, there's no question of their attaining success. It's going to happen. That's how powerful bhakti is. And then he says, but if people, even if they perfectly perform their occupational duties, read Varnashram Dharma, including Varnashram Dharma, even if they perform their occupational duties perfectly, they still don't gain anything. Just as we see in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And then he says, a couple of verses, this is 17, and 19, he says that even if a devotee gives up because of, well, Srila Prabhupada in his purport says twice, poor association. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his commentary says twice, poor determination. I think the two kind of go hand in hand. Still, he's not lost, because whatever he's gained is never going to be lost, and he's always going to remember the rasa, the juice, that loving exchange of whatever service he's done to the Lord's lotus feet, to the Lord's lotus feet. And when we talk, and I noted here that. In his purport to 43, Srila Prabhupada says, by performing Vishnu Yajña, one could even attain the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when we talk about attaining the Lord's lotus feet, what's implied is service to the Lord's lotus feet. And the word that's used in that verse to explain that remembrance of the embrace, as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out very carefully in his commentary, the embrace of the Lord's lotus feet, that's whatever he's gotten from the service of the Lord's feet, that person becomes rasagraha. And he explains, rasagraha means that you're remembering this taste that you always want to, or in other words, you're haunted by a ghost you cannot shake. haunted, he says, haunted by rasa. And then he explains, and this begins from the very first day of serving the Lord. That's how powerful bhakti is. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains at the beginning of his Madhurya Kadambini how bhakti works. We get, our inherent proclivity for bhakti is actually kind of awakened, catalyzed by the association of devotees. And once that happens, we don't have a chance. We try and try to wiggle off the hook. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains this in his commentary on that 1.5.19. He says, the devotee may give up the worship of the Lord once, twice, 3 times. But then he says, oh, what have I done? Forget it. Let me forget that. Now I'm going back to worshiping the Lord. And when the devotees do that, they depend on the Lord for their success. I'm going to make my best endeavor, and I will fail. We know that. We know that. How do we know that for sure? By our own experience. Pratyaksha, right? When pratyaksha is backed up by shabda, it's a very powerful pramana, a very powerful epistemological experience. I know I'm going to fail. And when in the Madhurya Kadambini, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur addresses this. And he says the stage of bhajana kriya has 2 sub-stages, anishtita and nishtita bhajana kriya. That stage of actively practicing bhakti under the guidance of the devotees. And he describes the different stages, 5, 6, 7 stages, I think, of anishtita bhajana kriya. Why does he do that? Because he knows it's going to happen. And he wants us to understand when that happens. Oh, I'm making some progress. Doesn't mean you're bad. It means, oh, I'm making some progress. I'm actually running into this difficulty now. Before, I was having that difficulty. Before that, I wasn't even aware that I wasn't really getting very far in my bhakti. So we go through these kind of like bumpy stages. It's like when you're on a path and it's narrow, bumpy, a lot of potholes, rocks and stuff like that, and it's twisty. But as we ascend that path of bhakti, it starts to level out, widen, and smooth out. And it becomes easier. And I had a devotee ask me once when we were discussing this at an ashram in Central America, in Costa Rica, Maharaj, how do we avoid these things? Utsaha mai and those things. And I thought for a moment, and I said, we don't. We work through them. That's why Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes them to us, at least as they might have been experienced 300 years ago, so that we will recognize them when they come and mark it. We won't get too discouraged, or we won't get caught up in spiritual bypassing either way. But so bhakti is completely different, and Lord Chaitanya, oh dear, has come to give us, especially for this age, the most effective and the simplest form of yajña to perform, and that's Harinam saṅkīrtana, something we engage in at least several times a day. I was talking to some devotees the other day, and they said, well, what's missing these days? One thing that's missing is going out on street saṅkīrtana anywhere from 6 to 10 hours a day. That's what we did. That was our life. You know, there was other service on top of that. So this is our life. There was in Alachua, Florida, they have just after Thanksgiving, the weekend after Thanksgiving, they have what they call the Festival of the Holy Names. And they have a theme, I guess, every year. And they have swag or merch, I guess. I guess it's merch because they sell it. I guess swag is what you get when you attend something. They give it to you. It's covered by your fee. It's not exactly free. But you buy T-shirts and tote bags and stuff. And one year the theme was, "This is what we do." And I wasn't living there then, but I regretted. I thought, oh gosh, if I still lived there, I'd get me a couple of those T-shirts. So this is an infallible process for actually achieving the service of the lotus feet of the Lord. And by this process, we become very much haunted by rasa. Okay, I'm going to stop. Comments, questions, discussion. Mukunda Prabhu.
I guess I was forgetting until today's the text and purport to 43 how this pastime of Puruva is happening in Satya-yuga. So just thinking about that, during the pastime, it fits. Nothing stands out to me. It fits that would happen in, let's say, Kali-yuga or something. But then generally the description of Satya-yuga that I hear, or that I read, is that everyone, as you mentioned, they're like Paramahamsas, they're all engaged, they're practically all in samadhi. There's no need for any caste distinctions. They're really all like practically self-realized. And specifically the Satya-yuga, all of the people, the humans are described as not attached to just a necessary sense gratification. And so now looking at it through that lens, now Puruva, the whole story seems confusing. How is that going on in such a society? How does that look? How does that fit? So could you comment on how that fits the Satya-yuga in general, and how that would really, how does that fit into society when everyone's like a yogi in Satya-yuga?
That was part of my adventure this morning. Actually, and because I hadn't spent a lot of time in this part of the ninth canto, I had forgotten that. It was just something that I read, and that was interesting. And this isn't a section that I've really explored much until this morning, and it is, after all, the material world, and there are things going on, just like we have our temples, little Vaikuntha places. But we have stuff going on here. Devotees have difficulties with their practice, difficulties with each other, difficulties with the larger societies, the larger devotional society sometimes, and certainly with the larger outside society. So things do happen in the material world. And it's a lila, it has a lesson. And then eventually, as we see, it ultimately ends in dharma. That even lust, this is a whole different part of the class that I didn't have time for because I got carried away with telling my goofy stories. We see back in the second canto this well-known verse: "Akama sarva kamava moksha kamo daradi tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusha param." That if we engage in bhakti yoga, and we see in the second chapter of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we see who's eligible for bhakti yoga. Srila Rupa Goswami says every human being is eligible for bhakti yoga, just as every human being is eligible to take bath in the Ganga during the month of Magh, when it's cold. The water is cold and the air is cold. Everyone has that eligibility, but then he discusses different levels of eligibility. So this is a human situation, and it's there to give us a lesson that this, Tivrena Bhakti Yogena, Srila Prabhupada and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur they discuss this word tivra very intensely. We have to really focus on our spiritual practice. And when distractions come, you note them and move on. You go back to your practice. Every meditation teacher tells you this, right? You're sitting in meditation and then you get a thought. Don't beat yourself up. don't get carried away with that thought either. Just note it. Oh, there's a thought. Put a pin in it, and then go back, to your whatever your focus, your breath, or the little point on the wall, or the tip of your nose, or the holy name, or whatever it is you're meditating on. So tivrena bhakti yogena, that's what's going to bring us that success. And that little bit of bhakti, even if it's not pure yet, that creates a situation that's progressively purifying. So I think it just may be here as a lesson. Although I have to go back and again read this in the broader context of this part, because we're going to move on to something else in the next, connected, but a whole different Leela in the next chapter.
Yeah, while you're speaking, I also thought of a couple other examples that they don't fully, I don't know if they fully cover this topic, but at least one thing is, you think of in first canto when Srila Prabhupada speaking about, what is Shringi's father, Saunaka?
Shamika Rishi.
Shamika Rishi. Srila Prabhupada, I think there the point is made that people sometimes have the wrong idea about yogis. They think they're just in yoga, they're like in samadhi, or they're in their meditation just all the time. But no, they have their meditation. Even if someone's a yogi, may have his meditation for so long, and then have whatever responsibilities one may also have. So maybe that's part of it, that I'm just saying, okay, Satya Yuga is all a bunch of yogis, but then maybe as you compared it to that, like an ashram or something like that, it then still has its, outside of the yoga practice or outside of the whatever practices there are, there's still the other daily activities and so on, and difficulties of the material world. But the other thing is, when you think of Satya Yuga, then we have these demons, Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu, Hayagriva. And so now that doesn't really, but those are just great demons, But if you think about it, there's a whole character arc, of them also having serious material ambitions, cultivating it, striving for it and building up some strength and so on. And so if that's going on in Satya Yuga, so surely there's room for, people in Satya Yuga having different ambitions, that aren't, they don't fit samadhi. Of course, I don't know if that totally covers it, because those examples seem to be almost like directly Krishna's arrangement. So, but still,
well, especially Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. The Lord says that himself in the third canto, when the four Kumaras are kind of freaking out.
Right.
Oh my God, what's our fate?
Yeah, so that doesn't fully cover this question of mine, but at least, but your answer helps. Thank you.
Yeah, Dravida Prabhu, do you have any thoughts on that?
What are you just talking about?
Yeah, how Pururava was so overcome by sexual desire in Satya Yuga. It seems a little anomalous if we think of everyone as sitting around meditating all the time. Of course, they were also having children. They were also eating, so there must have been agriculture and commerce.
The whole thing with Pururava, seems like an extended lesson in the Bhagavatam, with the culmination of which is the Gita, which comes in the 11th canto, a few cantos later. But he seems almost like a caricature. In other words, he's an example of just how you don't want to be, completely bewildered and absorbed and obsessed with sex life. This is the result is all this misery that he has, But finally, he sees the light in the 11th canto, and Krishna, he teaches the Gita, of Uddhava, I think.
He's so bewildered that this Agni-stali means a fire vessel.
Yeah.
It's a vessel in which you keep a little fire for your next fire sacrifice. And then he comes back and he sees that the Agni-stali is turned into Arani, and it grew out of this shami tree or something, and you rub the two sticks together, and that's how you get a sacrificial fire. So it's a whole, maybe a little figurative. I mean, there are some places like Puranjana that are announced as allegorical, as being a figurative, an extended metaphor. But the essence of the Bhagavatam is these lessons. So this, as we see, this this eventually shows up and it's fully realized in the Gita in the 11th canto, which is just like nothing but spiritual instruction.
Maharaj, I had a question, if you don't mind.
Okay, good.
Yes, please.
Hi, both. Please have my basis. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. I loved so many of the analogies and examples in your classes, and please don't ever stop telling the stories. You said one thing that caught me up a little bit, and I was hoping you could explain it. You mentioned that even before Narada Muni had come, Vyasadeva had also composed a version of the Bhagavad Purana. My understanding was that he had not. He had written the Vedanta Sutra, but that the Bhagavad Purana was a direct result of that meeting with Narada Muni. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, and I recently read elsewhere. I can't remember. I'd have to go back and look. I may still even have the tab open. That I was reading this somewhere where it discusses the observation that the Vedas speak like a king, the Puranas, The Vedas speak like a king. The Purana, how did it go? The Purana, the Purana is like a friend, and the Kavya like a lover, and Srimad Bhagavatam addresses us in all three modes. And there was some discussion there about this original Bhagavat Purana, but I don't remember exactly what the source was for that. I found it an interesting observation, and I just didn't have the opportunity to really chase it down. It was actually the first time that I had seen that there were 18 Puranas before, but perhaps it wasn't satisfying. So I have homework, as usual. I end up leaving any class I give with some homework.
All right, I'm satisfied with that answer. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Just one more comment. It's getting late.
It is late.
But I happen to I listen to a Prabhupada lecture every morning as I get ready. And he was referring to the story of Bilba Mangal Thakur, which is, he was also completely obsessed, with sex to the degree that he practically committed suicide trying to get to, the whole story. So, but he was, but then Chintamani turns out to be quite a contrast to Urvashi, in that she's giving him good instruction. If you were as attracted to Krishna as you are to this, stool-ridden body, you would be in great shape. And of course, it awakens his old bhakti, and he heads for Vrindavan. But again, he's his eyes. He's attracted. The whole story, and eventually he puts his eyes out and becomes blind like that. But it was just such a. And now I see the contrast. This Purava, he practically can't give it up, even though he's feeling so much the misery of the whole thing, and said he can't give it up until later.
Yeah, Urvashi's instruction is she's kind of leading him on. Her instruction's a little oblique, a little indirect, whereas Chintamani was like a slap upside the head. Dude, what is your deal? Yeah. Okay.
Hare Krishna. So in the beginning of this chapter, we read how this happened in another millennium. So I'm mentally speculating. So maybe I'm thinking it was Dwapar Yuga, not Satyug, because it's Satyug, Dwapar Yuga, Treta Yuga, and Kali-yuga.
That is a possibility, except that somewhere Srila Prabhupada talks about the setting is where everyone was Hamsa. Maybe it was in a previous purport in the chapter. I can't remember. But yeah, that's because Treta Yuga means third yuga, and Dwapara Yuga means second yuga. So perhaps this isn't the only cycle in which they're reversed, in which they're swapped. I'm not sure. So that's also an interesting question to chase down.
It does mention it was Satyuga, when he started.
Goodness gracious. He's reading that on his $15 flip phone.
It's not.
I guess they're not $15 anymore, but.
Can I say something real quick?
Okay, Chad.
Just real quick, Hare Krishna. Thank you for the nice lecture. So obviously, we all fell down from the spiritual realm. So one can fall down in Satya-yuga, I'm sure. Hare Krishna.
Okay, we'll just stop that one there. Don't get me started.
We all fell down from the spiritual realm.
Grantha Raja Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Go Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.